Have you ever looked at a film, read what it's about, and questioned why it was ever made into a movie? Yeah, me too. And this is a prime example of one of those films. This is 2019's The Drone, and it has a surprising 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. We might be in for a surprise with this one. Spoiler alert, this is definitely just my opinion. And links to the film are in the description for anyone that wants to try it out themselves. We open up to a woman coming out in the middle of the night. She throws her purse and mail down on the table, then she heads over to turn on the radio. Then the reporters start talking about how 3 women have gone missing, thanks to someone that's been spying on them with a drone. The woman continues to undress, and we see that a drone is spying through her window. After she thinks she hears something, she closes her window and the drone flies away. This drone flies what looks to be miles. How do you have range like that on an everyday drone? Soon, the drone comes back to a man who's guiding it back to him in the window of a rundown apartment. Once inside, he takes the footage from the drone and watches it on his computer. While watching the women undress, he says that she'll do just fine, but he's looking for someone in particular. Just then, a bang comes from the door, and we see that a SWAT team is ready to breach his apartment. The man grabs his drone and turns to a girl that he has tied up on a pole in the corner. When the SWAT team enters, they find that the man is gone, and he slit the throat of the woman before hiding. Eventually, one of the officers comes to the violator's hiding spot, and he slits the officer's throat before running up to the roof of the complex. As he screams that he isn't done yet, he begins to chant binary code. If we didn't already know that this was a horror comedy about a possessed drone, I'd say that this is definitely the end of you, buddy. But we know better than that. Later, we see more emergency services have arrived, and one of them brings down the drone to the detective. The detective takes the drone with him, and he calls his daughter to tell her that they killed the violator. I'm sorry, he's just having a casual conversation with this little girl about how they killed the pervert that rapes and murders like he's talking to a long-lost buddy. Who's just talking to their child about stuff like that? It's not even like it's a teenager that understands that kind of humor. I'd be mad if I was the violator too. After the car crashes, we see that the detective dies in the crash. And we cut to Chris, who's just moved into a new house with his wife, Rachel. After a little bit of banter, the two of them head inside with their dog, and Chris is impressed with the fact that he can control the house through an electronic system. Meanwhile, Rachel gets a nice little jump scare from the neighbor, Corinne. When Chris opens the door to introduce himself, Corinne just lets herself in and starts going through their stuff. Once she finds out that they haven't even been married for a year, she laughs because she thinks they barely know each other. It turns out that her ex ended up being a nightmare, and Rachel says hers was too. We find out that it was so bad that she had to get a restraining order placed against him. After that introduction, Corinne lets herself out, and it's clear that she has a thing for Chris. That was one of the most awkward neighbor encounters ever. I feel like someone would have made it very clear that they'll not be hanging out anytime soon. You don't just come into my house and touch my things. Props to Rachel for keeping her cool through all of that. She knows that she's got Chris all to herself, she's not worried. Soon, we see that the drone finds its way to their trash, and it shuts down on top of the can. When Chris takes the dog out, he notices the drone in the trash. Back inside, Rachel starts setting up the studio, and Chris comes in to show her the drone he found. Later, Chris goes out and gets a remote for the drone, and he takes it for a test drive when he gets home. After spying on the neighbor, the two of them head inside to get freaky that night. But little do they know that the drone is watching them. The next morning, Rachel takes a shower, but when she comes out, the drone's flying around watching her. When she goes to question Chris about it, he swears that he hasn't even touched it that morning. It even messes up her draft that she works hard to finish in her studio. Why do you even have that thing in your studio? It just freaked you out earlier, and you don't even like it. Why are you keeping it with you like it's a new puppy? Rachel calls Chris to make sure he isn't playing a joke on her. But he's miles away at work. She sets it on the counter in the living room, and she goes back to the studio to try and fix her draft. Little does she realize that the killer drone is flying around, spying on her. I can't believe I'm talking about a killer drone and this isn't a war movie. Soon, the pervert drone goes to take pictures of the sexy neighbor. When Chris comes home that night, he sees that the drone is sitting outside waiting on him. When he goes inside, the alarm goes off, and the drone sees the passcode as he enters it. Chris goes to kiss Rachel, but she swears that the drone is recording them, so he puts it out of the room. Now that it's time for some freaky quality time, the drone turns itself on and heads to the mirror to look at itself. When the dog comes in to bark at it, Chris goes to see why he's barking, and we see that the drone is back on the shelf. The barking gets on Chris's nerves so much that he sets up a stake for the dog outside. While he's outside, he hears Corinne is swimming next door, and he peeks over the fence to look at her. Little does he know that Rachel is watching him from the window. Before Chris leaves to go to work, she mentions that they should invite Corinne over for dinner, and she heads back into the studio. While working, she gets a flashback of a car crash that happened because a kid was playing with a remote control car in the road. I'm sorry, are you telling me that there's lore in this movie? A deep backstory for our character? I was not expecting that much depth in any bit of this film. The drone causes a commotion to get Rachel out of the studio. Then it pairs with the computer and uploads all of its videos and pictures into a folder for Rachel to find when she gets back. She finds pictures of Corinne in the folder, and she's none too happy. That night, the three of them have dinner, and Rachel tries to coyly bring up the idea that Chris might know about the folder on the computer. It turns out that Rachel is the one that was running the toy car on the road, and the driver of the car ended up plowing into a tree and died. After Rachel finds out that he told Corinne her past, she blames him for the folder that she found on the computer, and Chris tells Corinne that she should go.
You can come and shoot me anytime.
Are there neighbors like this out there? I always seem to get the neighbors that never talk to you or watch you from their house whenever they can. What a time we live in. The next morning, Rachel finds that the dog ended up hanging itself over the neighbor's fence. Rachel blames Chris for putting the dog outside, but she knows that the drone had something to do with it. Soon, she realizes that the drone is controlling the TV and trying to speak to her. After this, she begins to think that Chris didn't even take the video or photos. Soon, the alarm goes off for the front door, and Chris goes to investigate. He gets locked outside, and Rachel comes face to face with the self-flying drone. After the drone smashes into the door, the lockdown lifts, and Chris believes everything Rachel tells him now. I'm sorry, seeing the pictures and the video on the computer wasn't enough to sell you on a possessed drone? I would have been calling Ghostbusters at that point, because there's definitely something strange in the neighborhood. The next day, Chris goes to the hobby store to ask about why the drone might be moving on its own, and the salesman mentions that other electronics in the house might be interfering. When he realizes that the remote actually isn't paired with the drone, he mentions that it shouldn't even be flying at all. After he starts to drive home with the drone, he catches the eye of another woman in the car next to him. When the drone notices that he's checking out the woman, it starts to interfere with the car. It eventually takes complete control and almost succeeds in killing him. Throw it away! Why are we even trying to fix it? Just throw it away. Begone, foul drone! That night, Corinne's dancing around her house without a care in the world. But little does she know that the drone is stalking her. The next morning, Rachel calls Chris to the balcony, and they watch as an ambulance takes Corinne away in a body bag. Soon, their doorbell rings, and two detectives ask Chris to come to the station with them. Rachel tries to tell him that he doesn't have to, but Chris feels as though he has nothing to hide, so he goes with the detectives. After they leave, Rachel goes to the studio to erase the pictures of Corinne. Sure enough, the detectives seem to have an email from Chris that shows the pictures from his computer. That night, Rachel rushes to the station and yells about the drone to the detective, who obviously doesn't believe her. On her drive home, we see that the drone is still following her. When she gets home, a romantic house is prepared for her. You gotta give the drone credit. People wait their whole lives for someone to be that romantic. The drone also pulls her hair and records her. That's a special kind of person. After the drone gets a little too close to Rachel's face, she grabs it and throws it to the ground, before she stomps it over and over. When she realizes that the drone is broken, she runs out of the house and stays in a hotel for the night. The next morning, she goes to meet Chris as he's released from jail, and she tells him the news. While he's happy that she's safe, a broken drone doesn't really help his case for being accused of murder. They rush back to the house to look for the drone, but all they find are pieces of the undercarriage and the camera lens. They search the entire house, but they find nothing. They turn to calling an investigator out to their house, and that's where we meet Dominic Baker. They figured that he wouldn't believe them, so they explain that they just really need him to find the drone. After he finds a serial number in the wreckage, he leaves to find out information. That night, Rachel thinks that Chris is trying to get frisky with her under the sheets, but she finds out that he's not even in the room. So cheesy, but I still chuckled at it. I have to admit that every bit of this movie's ridiculous, but I'm still thoroughly entertained. When she wakes up from the dream, she ends up being in another dream where the drone is next to her, and she snaps herself out of that dream too. The next morning, we hear the drone is in someone else's apartment, and it's only after the man shoots at the drone that he realizes that it's actually his brother in the drone. This is Richie, and he ends up helping to fix the drone and make it new and improved. That night, Chris changes the password on all of the security protocols, and he gets a call from Dominic, who says that his tech friends have traced the GPS on the drone. Little does he know that it's just on the other side of the wall. This is a little bit more than I planned on subjecting myself to today. The next day, Chris tries to get in contact with Dominic, but there's no answer until he gets a picture of Dominic's bare butt. They assume that the drone knows that they're tracking it now, so they get the last known location that Dominic had tracked it to. When they get to Richie's apartment and ask about the drone, they see that he has all of his tools out. While Rachel distracts him, she grabs a few pieces off of the counter, but she sees the picture of Richie and his brother. Richie attacks both of them, but Chris ends up drilling him with a drill. Talk about function. Rachel grabs a hold of his leg, and Richie falls back and hits his head. When Rachel and Chris get in the car to go back home, she tells him that she knows exactly who's in the drone.
Ramsey, like your ex-Ramsey, the pervert?
He's the drone.
Go figure. She went from being with a perverted psycho killer to being with a 5-star model photographer? That's one hell of a leap. After they get back home, Chris tells Rachel to pack up, but it's too late. The drone's already there. Soon, the cops show up at the door, and someone lets them through the door. When they mention that they have a warrant for Chris's arrest, Rachel warns them that he's in there, and the drone swoops in and decapitates the police. As Chris mentions making a run for it, the drone puts the house on lockdown, and Rachel tries to address her ex. Next, the drone sheds its own skin, and we see the new upgrades that he's gotten. When the drone goes to attack Chris, Rachel grabs Chris's old drone and distracts the drone long enough to make a break upstairs. This entire finale is something I never thought I'd watch in my life. In an epic conclusion, Rachel grabs paint thinner, sprays the drone, and Chris sets it on fire as he says a quirky one-liner. This movie's so ludicrous that it might actually be a little bit good? Maybe? But wait, there's more. As Rachel goes to call the police, Chris investigates the pieces that are left, and somehow a spark sends the soul of Rachel's ex from the drone into Chris. Chris goes to be with Rachel, and she's immediately thrown off by his passion. It doesn't take her long to realize that it's really Ramsey inside of Chris. He attacks her as she goes to run, but she's got a trick up her sleeve. What is going on? We are so far off the reservation that this movie's barely anything like how it started. She ends up shoving Chris out the window, and he's impaled by the stake he used for the dog. As she gets a last glimpse of Chris, she breaks down, and the credits roll. Okay, I'm gonna be short and sweet in this conclusion. Just watch it for yourself. Do not take it seriously, though. This movie's strictly for entertainment purposes, and it surprisingly was. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.